Hi, this is Kat with Beadaholique, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a pair of earrings using resin, but there's going to be a little trick here because these particular earring findings have a hook soldered on and attached to them, so we can't just hold it up and add our resin because otherwise it would spill out. So I have a little tip here. And to set it up, we're going to be using just a little craft box, and you can see that I've poked a couple of holes there, and this one I've already secured in there, so you can just see kind of underneath how that looks. But in order to get it to be secure and level, we're going to use some museum putty. Now this is basically sticky tack. You can get this at any hardware store. A lot of craftware stores have this as well. So basically it's just this sort of gummy substance that's not going to leave any marks on our piece. So you just get a nice little ball there. Close that up and set that aside. And just sort of roll it out into like a little flat little disc there. And what we're going to do is we're going to slip our earring onto our little board here, and you can see that it would move around and it's not completely level. If you kind of look at the side there, it wouldn't be level. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pick that up and sort of squish down our little museum putty right onto our little board there, and then pick that up and go ahead and squish it down right on top of it. And now you can kind of get down at your eye level and just sort of move it around and make sure that it is nice and level, and then just sort of give that a little shake. We just want to make sure that's not going to go anywhere. And also my box here is a little unlevel, so you want to make sure that when you are looking at it, you have a nice flat surface right across the top there. So once that's all set up, you're all good to go. So these type of earrings, these are from the Nunn design line, and they come in an antiqued gold, and they also have various different sizes and shapes there for you to play with. So I'm going to play with these little square ones here. Okay, so now I'm going to start doing my resin. So for that, I have a couple of little cups over here. I have my easy cast resin that I'm going to work with. We also have Nunn design resin and ice resin, so there's lots of different opportunities there. I'm going to use some CASTIN craft opaque pigments to give myself a little color there. I have some popsicle sticks and some toothpicks, but the first thing is first, we are going to pour our resin. So I have these little cups here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 1 ounce of resin, and I'm going to do half of the hardener and half of the resin. So we're going to just place that down there. And before we get started, I am going to put some gloves on. We recommend that you follow all of the safety precautions when working with resin. That includes gloves, working in a ventilated area, and working with a mask or ventilator on. All right, so I have my gloves on now. My work surface is nice and protected. Now here's another time where you might want to get all the way down to the table there so you can see yourself pour the resin and make sure that it is at the right height. So I'm gonna just unscrew my resin and pour slowly. We want to try to avoid as many air bubbles as possible. And just go ahead and fill that up, and we're going to do a half an ounce. You always want to make sure that it's going to be exactly half, and as you get close to that mark, go ahead and kind of pull back a little bit. Want to make sure that we get just enough, and you get that little extra drop there. All right, perfect. So that is part 1, that is our resin, and now we're going to add our hardener. Doesn't matter which order you add these in, really. You just want to make sure that you have equal parts of both. All right, so now I'm going to be adding this part again, quickly at first if you want. And then I'm just pulling back as I get closer to the line. And there we go. All right, and I got a little on my thing there, but that's okay. I can wipe that up a little later. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to mix our resin. And go ahead and take one of those popsicle sticks, and what we want to do is we want to start to mix it, but we want to try to avoid as many air bubbles as possible. So you don't want to kind of rapidly mix it, you just kind of want to start to mix it there, kind of scraping the edges. That's a good way to do it, especially with that popsicle stick. And you definitely want to be wearing gloves for this, because if it happens to spill over, we want to make sure that we are protected. And you can see that there's a lot of striations happening, so what we want to do is continue to mix it until all of those striations are gone. You'll do this for a few minutes until it looks completely mixed, and then you're going to want to let it sit for about 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to keep mixing, and I'm going to let my resin sit, and then I'm going to come back to show you how we're going to add some color and add it to our bezels. All right, so I've just mixed my resin and let it sit. You can see it's a little bit thicker now, and a lot of those striations are gone. You can also feel the sides of the cup. It should be just a little bit warm. That means it's ready to go, and you can see when I dip the stick in there, it really kind of affects the resin, so it's not as liquid as it used to be. So what we're going to do to color our resin, we don't want to color this whole batch because you can use this for other things. Clearly, we're not going to need this whole ounce of resin. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of pour a little bit into another cup here, and I'm going to scrape off my stick there and just pour a good amount, even more than what you are going to need for your project. You always want to do just a little bit extra, and I'm just going to scrape off the sides there so I can set this down and set this aside. All right, so now I have a little bit of resin in my cup, and you can see just how clear that is. So now what I'm going to do is take the CASTIN craft. Now I have a black, a white, and a blue. I'm going to go for like a navy blue kind of color. So here's what I suggest. Start with your main color because I want it to be blue. I want it to feel navy blue. And I'm going to use my second little cup here with nothing else in it to sort of get a little bit of that dye, because this will help you control the amount that you can get onto and into that resin cup. Because see, and trying to squeeze it out is just a little too much. So you want to get even just a little bit less than that for the amount of resin we have. So I have a little bit of blue, so I'm going to start to mix that into my resin. And you can see how electric and how vibrant that really is. And that's not going to achieve the dark color that I want. So I'm going to kind of mix that in. And here's the thing, when you're doing colored resin, you want to be very careful of how dark things are and how much colorant you're adding. So that's why we tell you to add just a little bit at a time. And also you have that extra resin there, so if you find that you really need to add a little bit more clear resin in here, it's gotten too dark, you can sort of adjust it that way without adding any more color. So you're adding more resin, which will help distribute the color. So you can see it's very vibrant there. All right, now I'm going to try adding a little bit of the black before I add more blue, because I want to, like I said, make this just a navy blue. So now I'm going to add even just a little bit less. I have a little bubble there. I'm doing the same technique, just a very little bit there onto my toothpick. You can see just how small, and I'm going to add that. So we're just going to kind of add that to our little stirring stick there. Just add a little bit of that black, see if that darkens it. All right, I think I'm going to need to go a little bit more. And you don't want to get resin onto your CASTIN craft, so what I'm going to do is just sort of try to get that to drip onto it, and then I'll wipe it off. So just a little tiny drip. A little too much there, perfect. So we can just let that kind of sit off. Just a little bit more of that black in there. And this is darkening it up a little bit at a time. I think what I want to try to do is make it just a little bit more opaque. And you can see that I'm getting a lot of bubbles in there. Don't worry, we're going to let it sit, so don't freak out. All right, let's go ahead and add a little bit of that white. Same technique, kind of getting just a little bit on the toothpick there. A little bit more. And this is where, if you're going to do a multiple resin pour and you want things to be a certain color, there we go. See, that's much more opaque. You see how milky that makes it? Just that little bit of white. Okay, there we go. If you want to add more coloring as you go here, this is getting really kind of heavy with some color. So, and I know that I want to make that darker, I'm going to add in some black. So I'm going to set my white aside. I think I'm good with that. I'm going to add in just a little bit more resin because I want to achieve a slightly darker color. But if you are doing a multiple pour, let's say you're making several different pairs of earrings or something and you want them all to be the same color, you're going to want to do it all at the same time because it is difficult to replicate some of this. All right, so there's more black, and I'm going to kind of remove these guys here and set them aside. So now I have a little bit more of that black pigment coming in, and it's getting it a little bit darker. All right. Actually, I'm quite happy with that color. It's really nice. It's a nice classic blue sort of color. I'm going to mix that in. I think I'm going to try to get a little bit more of the black. I'm going to scrape that off there at the top and get a little bit more. There we go. Some nice concentrated color. All right, and the final thing I'm going to do, let me close up my dies here. Set these all aside. Is I'm going to add in a little bit of the Crystal Clay Sparkle Dust, and this is in the white pearl, so this is just going to give it a little pearlized look. And again, with this stuff, you really don't need a lot, so you can just sort of use either a toothpick or one of your little sticks here, and just sort of tap that in. It works like a really fine glitter powder. And then I'm just going to mix that in there, and you can see that it's going to transform our resin into a really fun little glittery sparkle, but it's going to be really subtle. All right, so just something kind of fun there. So a little blue sky, if you will. All right, I'm going to close that guy up. Don't want to sneeze with this around. Okay, we are ready to do our pour. Now, to do your pour, I would recommend taking a clean popsicle stick. I'm going to go ahead and remove this and set this aside. Take that clean popsicle stick, give it a nice stir and a scrape, and then when you go to pour it into your bezels, go ahead and take just a very little bit at a time and drip it in. Just let it kind of fall into the center there. And you can see that it's very light because I have a little silver here happening. So just one little drop at a time, just making sure it kind of coats. You can play around with it a little bit and sort of tip it just to make sure it's going to get everywhere it needs to be. I'm going to add another little drop, but only a drop at a time. And again, it will fill the space because it just, it wants to go where it wants to go. There we go. And then I'm going to slowly move over and do my second one here. And I could probably get another one. There we go. Just move that to the side. And another little drop, I think. Okay. And now again, I'm just going to tip it. Be mindful of your first one. You can see it just ever so slightly. Don't want anything to move around too much. There we go. And I think I can get away with adding a very tiny little drop. There we go. Just to fill that out. And the same on this one. I can go back and just add a very little bit. All right. So now here's the trick. Very slowly, just sort of move your items aside. You can cover your resin with a dome or something to keep any dust from it, but you're going to want to let that sit. I am seeing that I do have a little bubble there. So what I'm going to do is just remove my gloves, set those aside, and then what you can do is you can let it sit for a few minutes. Let's see if there's any other bubbles that come up, but you can take just any sort of like a Bic lighter, and we're just going to wave it across, and that's going to pull out any little bubbles. You can just sort of see it kind of sparkle there up at the top. Now please be very careful when working with your lighter, especially if your block that you're using is made of paper. You want to make sure that you're just barely, not even touching the surface, but it'll get that heat to rise and all those bubbles to disperse. So that is how you make a pair of earrings using resin, and today we use the CASTIN Craft Opaque Pigments. We also used the Crystal Clay Sparkle Dust. We used the Easy Cast Museum Putty you can just get from any store. And these are the Nunn Design bezels, and you can have a lot of fun. You can put some great little organics in those to make your very own resin pieces. Thanks so much for joining me. You can get all of these supplies and see even more tutorials by heading over to Beadaholique.com.